All right, welcome to the DiWulf Podcast. I am your host for this episode, Amy Yates-Wolfing, and I could not be more pleased to be here with Edie Evans, author, poet, photographer, artist, all-around awesome woman. She's had the patience of a saint putting up with the DiWulf Podcast technical difficulties, but here we are, and it's exciting. So let me just read a little introduction of Edie before we get started. So she is a lifelong poet, having spent time in both London and New York during punk's original heyday in the late 70s and early 80s. She has always comfortably floated between those two worlds, and she became deeply entrenched in New York's East Village scene that was so pervasive in the 80s and 90s, spending years performing spoken word poetries at venues such as the Nuyorican Cafe, Brownies, and the Knitting Factory. Check her out on Instagram at originalpunkster11. And we're going to talk about her latest book, Old West, as well as her earlier book, which is called Time for My Generation to Die. So welcome, Edie. I'm so excited.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such an exciting adventure trying to get here.
It was all me. I was the one who was like Mr. Magoo trying to set up this podcast. I don't know what was happening.
Honestly, I think I could have had partial, to do with that too. So
well, that's nice of you to
but we made it. Here we are. Anyways, it's really good to see you.
Yes.
Thanks for having me on.
Definitely so excited. I know in the past you and I have talked about how I'm just totally jealous of the time that you got to spend in New York at the time you got to spend it. The classic stuff, New York Dolls, Mercer Art Center, Ramon, CBGB's, Gildersleeves, all of it. But I know that was kind of when it started, and you've gone back and forth between there, London, Massachusetts. So can you kind of give us just a little bit of an overview of your life and where it's led you?
I think so. I think it's a good idea. Let me give you a timeline. So it started, well, first of all, I'm a lifelong poet. I've been thinking in rhyme since I was, ever since I could think, which is a blessing and a curse because I really don't like poetry. To say hate is kind of a strong word, but I'm not a fan of most poetry, especially most modern poetry, which I don't mean to sound elitist. I just don't find much of it very good or thoughtful. So good poets do exist. They're far and few between, and the scenes are all over the place. But having this curse of thinking in rhyme since I was 5 years old, I've had no choice but to be a poet. Who doesn't like poetry? So that's been my life's trajectory, and it's led me down some interesting paths. By the time I was 17, I knew I had to get out of my hometown, like so many of us did at that time in our lives and at that time in history. So I graduated high school early, and I worked full-time in a record store, which couldn't have been a cooler job. And then I packed my stuff and left for London. And I had never been there, I'd never been on an airplane, actually. And so I just got on a plane and went and had an adventure for myself for several months in London and parts of Europe. And, it was 1977, so I was meeting a lot of punk rockers. I was hanging out in squats and just, doing the whole little punk rock London thing. And it was then that I found out I was like gonna stay there. I loved it so much. I was just gonna stay there. But then I got a letter from home, because we still had letters at those times, saying I had gotten a full scholarship for poetry to come back and go to the University of Massachusetts. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to be a poet, whether I like it or not. So I came back. I went to school at University of Massachusetts. I did spend a year back in England studying film and video as well. Came back from there and ended up in New York for almost 30 years, during which time the East Village scene was thriving. It was filled with like tons of galleries and art and readings. And I was very much a part of that and really enjoyed it. And I have to say, like on every block, there were, umpteen galleries, and they were just filled with art, and most of it was garbage. And it was, it was so much fun. It was literally, baby doll heads stuck on canvas and under black light, things like that, and those things kind of became tropes of themselves after a while, but that's where a lot of it originated. I think a lot of it was probably from like 50s cool groovy art meets 60s garage stuff meets punk aesthetic, and it ended up its own scene in the 80s in the East Village. So I did a lot of readings there and had a lot of fun there, and it was great, and spent 30 years in New York altogether, from East Village to Brooklyn. And after 30 years, we left and came to Tucson, Arizona. And so I went from the deep city to the deep desert, and I couldn't be happier.
Well, that's awesome. So I know you sent me some photos of your misspent youth. So we're gonna look at them now. But
I prefer to think of it as well-spent youth.
here's a picture of you looking as cute as the Dickens, just holding up the newly released Nevermind the Bullocks.
It had just been released. I was working in the record store and it had just come out, and I listened to it and I was like, I just found my people. It was amazing. And of course, I was also holding up the Tough Darts, who were a local Connecticut band who, they weren't really, you couldn't really hold a candle to the Sex Pistols. And the Tough Darts were the most minimal holding of a candle. They had one hit. It was called Your Love is Like Nuclear Waste, as I recall. Your body is a danger to the human race. Stamp contaminated right across your face. Love is like nuclear waste. Okay.
I can't believe that hasn't become a classic.
I can't believe I remember that. See, this is the curse of the poet, right? You remember anything that rhymes, whether it's good or not. So
this is in Connecticut at the record store.
This is in Connecticut at the record store. This is probably about, I want to say maybe 2 months before I left for London. And so yeah, that's the story of that. Then I left for London and I was never the same. There I am in London at 17, cut off my hair, and I think that was in Earl's Court where I was staying with a bunch of squatters. And this was later in England. This was, I want to say 1980, 81, when I went back to do film and video. These were friends of mine who were in a Dutch punk band called the Rooftop Dogs. Probably a little bit bigger than the Tough Darts. But they were great. They were big in Holland, So, so here's a pub picture of us three little punks. 21st birthday at Amherst, Northampton, Mass, with some punk friends, and up to no good. Absolutely.
I can tell by the look on your face that you're up to no good. And I love this one at the Limelight.
Yeah, this was at the Limelight. This was a New York Fashion Week thing. We had our own downtown fashion shows. So I did shows for my hairdressers. I did shows for friends who did their own clothing lines, mostly runway stuff, some print, but it was very much in the punk aesthetic, and it was all part of the downtown scene. It wasn't, Fashion Week, high Fashion Week, anything like that.
Right.
Definitely part of the downtown fashion scene. So that was fun.
And then here's a final one. This is in New York City.
That's right. This is, I want to say, this is in the late 80s. This is my band, which was my poetry band. We were called Fugitive Tribe. That was our names. And we did poetry in the round, and we performed in a variety of places. Each one of us would get up and do a piece, then the next person would do a piece, et cetera, et cetera. So this was before the Gulf War. So this was in the late 80s. And that was one of our publicity shots at the time.
Nice. That's nice.
It was different and interesting. We all had very different voices. So it was a kind of an interesting combination of personalities and poetry.
Awesome. So go tell us more about this book. This is your first book of written poetry?
Yes, it's a collection of my work spanning probably about 30 years, but most of it's recent, I have to say. And I did have to update some of the older stuff, but I threw it in there because I thought it would be an interesting history. And it's called Time for My Generation to Die. And the reason why it's called Time for My Generation to Die is because I believe it's time for my generation to die. We're done. We should get out of here. We should leave room for everybody else. I hope that
But
Good
I know that
stuff.
one time you were talking about how you're officially of the baby boomer generation, but there was a schism within baby boomers between the hippies and people who started punk rock, basically. And you had a name for it. Was it like the Jones?
Yep. I am not a boomer. I'm Generation Jones.
Generation
It
Jones.
is definitely a very different generation than the boomers. And it's not a well-known generation, but look it up. It exists. We're like this weird little 10-year span between the late 50s to the middle 60s when we were born that did not have hippie aesthetics. And they called us, we grew up in the 70s. So a lot of, oh, you mean the me generation. Well, it was more like the who me generation because, we were like the sad sisters of the baby boomers. We weren't, the children of the boomers. So we weren't Gen Xers that were getting raised in a very particular way with particular aesthetics and stuff like that. So we were kind of like the sad sacks that were kind of left on our own and always compared to our older siblings, always like, you're never going to be as good as them. What do you guys have? Da, da, da. So I think that we kind of grew up with this sense of nihilism that didn't exist. It wasn't that eternal optimism that a lot of the hippies had, that they were like peace, love, and all that stuff, which we would have loved to have manifested, and it never did. So I think that we saw it wasn't manifesting, and I think that we called them out on that shit pretty early, knowingly or unknowingly. And everybody I've talked to was born within those years, and we have this discussion, say, yeah, that's it. I was definitely part of that. So it's been a little liberating to find out about Generation Jones, I gotta say, because I never felt like a boomer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think officially I fall within the Gen X category, but that kind of, never really kind of spoke to me either. Like they seemed a little younger than me. So what you're saying makes sense. I felt like neither one of those things really apply to me, but what you're discussing right now does totally sound like it's the people that surrounded me when I was growing up and kind of the ideals that we had. And looking at how things turned out, the things that failed, the ideals that just seemed to go nowhere and that people really didn't hold on to. A lot of the hippies, they quickly became capitalists and went to go work for their dad or, whatever, that they really didn't hold tight to it.
Yep. There was a lot of hypocrisy in that generation. And I think there is in every generation, by the way. I don't want to just vilify the boomers because it's a popular, train to step on. But I do think that in part, some of the boomers were kind of responsible for the decimation of the planet as it exists today.
Exactly.
I think that as much as there were caring, loving boomers who really did want to make the world a better place, there were a bunch of soulless, self-involved people who have basically been bent on just me, and destroying the world, Donald Trump, and destroying the world. So,
Yes.
and without consequence, like they don't care about
Yeah.
the consequence, but it doesn't affect them. And I think that's one of the things punk rock stemmed from, was like, actually, we do give a shit. We really
We do care. Yeah. We care too much. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so sorry, next generation, it is time for my generation to die. And it's something. But
Yes.
anyway, so this book travels, this is kind of like a little life story. What happens with Time for My Generation to Die is it's divided into 5 parts, and it's Western ballads, which is pretty much the more recent stuff. Then I kind of do a little quick survey of US News and World Report, because that's my perspective. I like to talk about fame and what draws people to fame, and what a lie fame is, and how people are so misrepresenting, what they think it is, and why it's such a strange aspiration. Then I have a part that's kind of broken love songs. And my last part's Eastern, so it's more about Europe and New York and that kind of stuff. And it's accompanied by an audiobook, which we're just finishing up.
I know that it's so exciting.
Thank
Tell us a
you.
little bit more about the audiobook. I know it's not just your standard issue audiobook where you're just reading. There's production that goes in there. There's sound effects and whatnot.
It's really exciting. I'm lucky enough to live with a professional producer, engineer, musician, multi-instrumentalist who is completely versed in all of this stuff. And so we were able to put together actually an album. It's not even an audio book. It's every recording has a backing track, whether it's Foley or whether it's music. There's sound effects throughout. It's actually a theatrical production with punk aesthetic, much more so than a straight audio read. So we're actually going to try to release it separately as well.
And you're putting the finishing touches on that.
We're mastering it. We just finished mastering it. I got to send it off to my publisher in the UK, and he seemed to really love it. So we'll see what kind of distribution he wants to do with it. So there'll be more on that on my social media and certainly on my website, as well as Original Punkster 11 on Instagram, and eddevans.com is my website. And I have a YouTube channel under Ed Evans as well. So I'm trying to get the word out. Because I think it's unique and I'd like people to hear it just because I haven't heard anything like it. So I think people might go, and I'm hoping it'll spread a little joy. But it took a while to create. It's been like probably 6 to 8 months in the making of some pretty dedicated time. So we're pleased with it, and I'll let you know more about that. I'll be blasting that all over as soon as it's ready.
And so to just give people a little taste, I know you and I talked about some of the poems in here. So you're going to read some for us now.
Sure, I'll read you a piece now.
Okay.
I think what I'll do is I'll start out with a Western piece since we're here in the West. Okay. The first piece in the book, it's called Swallow. And just to let you guys know, I like to tell tales. They're all tall tales, but I enjoy telling them. So, Swallow. A swallow older than the seas had this strange tale to tell. It wasn't just Africanized bees that made Sonora hell. Some new gringos rode into town. Their choice of place was many. This posse, clowns in hand-me-down, said, "Here's as good as any." The swallow blinked through narrowed eyes and scars from birds and bugs. "You gambling men from far away are fodder for these thugs. I'll watch you gamblers go to hell. This much I will avow. Mi compañeros will not sweat dead gringos anyhow. You'll end up just like all the rest, your heads upon a stick. A harbinger for gambling men, El Jefe's favorite trick." El Jefe watched and was not pleased to see those choyos land. He forced them down onto their knees and made them play their hand. One by one, those men were shot, bullet to the back of the head. One by one to the ground they dropped, a quick dispatch, then dead. Each head was placed upon a stake and left for all to see, to warn off future gamblers and as food for the Africanized bees. They gambled fate and fortune, and filthy lucre sought. Instead, invited torture for the troubles that they brought. These men with cards and guns and knives, but nothing more in life. No cheer and kindness, loving blindness, caress of a wife. They kept their gambling secrets well, held closely to their vest, until they met El Jefe, who had staked his claim out west.
I love that.
Thank you. It's a little bit about the West.
Now, when did you write this? Did you write this after you moved out west or before?
I wrote it after I moved out west, and the inspiration for that was my partner turned to me and he said, "Wow, wouldn't it be cool if we had this vision of like a gambler who died and whose soul was caught somewhere?" And I said, "How about in the flesh of a swallow?" And that's where that started. And of course, we live on the drug cartel route here in Tucson, going from Tucson to Phoenix. So there was an awful lot of cartel action when I first moved here. And so it wasn't uncommon to hear about crazy things happening.
Bodies in the desert and everything. Yeah.
And people being thrown off of bridges. Yeah, things like, so it kind of wrote itself in a way, you know.
That's cool.
Thank you.
And it's sort of the cover illustration here, and I'll put this in the video, but yeah, that sort of reminds me of it sort of epitomizes that poem.
And the artist who did that, her name is Natalie Woodson. She is a phenomenal artist. She does wood burning work, and she does like animals that look like they have fur made out of wood. She does skulls, she does bones, she does all sorts of things. She's a truly phenomenal visual artist in every medium. And so I was really lucky to work with her on this book. I'm just love her illustrations that are throughout the book, and they're pretty special within themselves. So.
Yeah, it's an amazing cover.
Thank you. So interestingly enough, so the whole Western thing, actually, and I'll come back and read another poem later if you like me to, but sure. I really like to, I think it's a good segue to discuss how it kind of led into Old West, which is my second book. Thank you so much for holding that up. This book, it's a philosophy, my personal philosophy of life, who really should give a shit about my personal philosophy of life. However, it's kind of a nihilistic punk philosophy. And if you are of that school or interested in how some of us might have thought back in the day and still do, you might want to give it a read. It's a 10-minute read, and it's my own photos. I took it on a journey visiting ghost and mining towns throughout Arizona and New Mexico, abandoned structures, abandoned mining towns, and like I said, ghost towns, some of which still are partially inhabited, mostly aren't, but these things are all over the Southwest. So it's like this trail of crazy spirits when you do these trips, and it inspires some kind of immediate self-reflection from me anyways. So I took these sepia tone photos with real film many, many years ago as we did this journey. And that's a real gravestone, by the way. It says killed by Indians. I'm not trying to be politically incorrect. That's actually what the gravestone said, guys. So yeah, you know, so anyways, I had these images, and I knew I wanted to do something with it, and I wasn't sure what, but the whole book kind of came together in my head on a walk home from the pet store in Brooklyn, because as you do,
As one does, yes.
Walking home from 9th Street in Brooklyn to do my home. And I realized that everything I had to say in the book, and sort of like this flash of a vision. So I came home and I wrote it, and spent the next 25 years refining it, coordinating it, combining it, discombining it, taking it apart, putting it back together, until I finally put it into a form that I felt justified the words. So that's my second book. It is basically, in a nutshell, my philosophy, I guess you could say, is I am nothing, and that is everything to me, and not nothing in a self-deprecating way, and not nothing even in a nihilistic way, I guess, if I'm going to be honest. But when you consider our places in the universe and how unimportant we actually are, and yet that's very important because we each have a role to play. So that's my philosophy. I'm nothing, and that's everything to me. And that's what the book's about, the journey of getting there.
And we talked about a little bit when you and I spoke previously about how just the desolate landscape, abandoned structures, weird tombstones, here's like a Mexican grave site, and how the era when you were living in New York, New York was bankrupt. There really was crime there now, which there's crime everywhere, but the crime in New York City in the 80s was pretty epic. And that kind of, it's the same sort of feeling, the feeling that you're on your own, the feeling that danger is right around the corner, but just in a different setting. So instead of kind of like an urban landscape, it's more kind of this harsh desert that you're encountering with, just scrub and nothingness.
I love that parallel. I think it's really appropriate, and I think it's really astute too. And I think that you can find those sharp edges and beauty wherever you are, but I think it's probably why I've gone from one extreme to the other. It kind of shook me to my core to go to another extreme, and it was a good thing, you know. But I agree with you. When I was in New York, Avenue B was a supermarket. It was a drug supermarket. It was crazy. I mean, you walk out on Avenue B and like people were just sitting on the sidewalk selling every kind of drug imaginable in and out of buildings, no problem. And it was before something called Operation Pressure Point happened on Avenue B, where they came in and they swept all the drug dealers off the streets and down a few avenues. And then eventually they swept them to Brooklyn, even though they never got rid of them. They thought they were cleaning up the neighborhood. All they did was push them down. And, so it looked cleaner. It wasn't
It
at
looks
all.
better, yeah.
Yeah, it looked a lot better for the nice people that came in to buy overpriced property there. So that's what they needed and that's what they got. And, I just felt really lucky to be in the East Village at a time where it was a desert and it was, kind of a little crazy world unto itself. So, yeah, it took a little time to adjust to move out to the desert after being in the city for so long, but it didn't take that long. Once I adjusted, I was here. My heart was here too.
So tell me about this trip where you took the photo. So had you ever been out west before, or this was your first venture out west when you went, I guess it was a road trip where you took these photos? Like, tell me how that came about.
It was. So I had really good friends living out here. And my late husband and I came out and to visit them and decided we were going to do a road trip. And I knew that I wanted to see ghost towns. I wanted to focus on ghost and mining towns. I wanted to see those kind of things because, we just didn't have the same type quality of them back home, even though they did have, plenty of abandoned structures and things like that, in the East. So we came to visit friends and then we took off and we just went on this journey and I had, maps and guides and books because we didn't have, Google Maps at the time. So we plotted out our little adventure and we went from place to place. And a lot of them were really hard to find because they're like not off the roadside. You got to go, off a beaten track and walk a mile. And there's,
Wow.
old cross. So it was cool. It was a real adventure. It was very exciting. And probably, I think one of the better trips I've had in my life because it was just so overwhelmingly cool. And every time you saw something breathtaking, you'd go and you'd see something even more breathtaking. But what came out of it was this feeling of isolation, as you say, in kind of a positive way. It's like you're born alone, you die alone. And these things kind of bring those things home to you that you can look at these types of environments or structures and it can evoke such emotion. It can either evoke the emotion of like distance or it can be very, very personal. And for me, it was such a weird combination of both. And I think that's where the philosophy sprung out of it. And it's interesting because most of the people I've shown this book to that are, within our generation have very much related to it. So
Yeah, I think as you get older, kind of the illusion that people are there for you, that they're always, that your friends are always going to be there. You start to realize, no, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. And that you really are, like you said, you're born alone, you're born alone, you die alone. And at certain points in your life, you're going to have to walk alone. And the only person you can rely on is yourself. So looking at these photos, it just really, it makes it very clear that that you have to have your wits about you and you have to not kid yourself about your place in the world and in the universe, that you are one person and that you all you have is you.
yeah, thank you. That sums up, quite a bit of it really well. And I think that there's a difference between lack of self-importance and being and what's the word I'm reaching for? I think you can be humble and lack self-importance. I also think you can be the opposite and think you're so much more than that and very much more important than everyone around you and have so much more to say and much more to offer, and you don't. So I think it's really important to check yourself before you wreck yourself, as the 90s rappers used to say. So.
No, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
And to keep a sense of humor about oneself, because that's something that has so lost in our society now. People just don't know how to laugh about themselves. And like, I do nothing but laugh at myself on a regular basis. So there you go,
Yeah,
So
and the outrage addiction that we seem to have prevalent in our society right now. You look at these photos, and just the the bleakness and the beauty at the same time, that that it's calming and peaceful, and that you really like the fact that you're fired up about somebody's social media post or some other bullshit like that. Like, just let it go. It doesn't matter.
yeah. I always
It
keep
doesn't
telling
matter.
people, like, and it's because I had the luxury of growing up before social media, and now I'm very much part of it. But I also like to remind people all the time that social media is a choice. People always say, it's not, I have to advertise, I have to do this and this and this. Well, you can do those things, but getting personally involved on social media, that's a choice.
And if somebody says something that pisses you off and you choose to engage, and then get yourself all fired up, that's a choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I'm a firmly committed and believer in the First Amendment rights, that people should be able to say whatever the hell they want, whether I like it or not, but they also have to be prepared to defend it. So you have to be held responsible for what you say. Say whatever you want, but
Yeah.
make sure you defend it and make sure that you know what you're saying. Anyway, less words would be nice for many people. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I really like Old West, is just the economy of words, that, like you said, it's one continuous poem, with the photos that you took, but it's very, there's not one unnecessary word in there. Like, it's very, like, each word is very deliberate, which is what I really like about it. That, just like the landscapes, it's like spare, it's sparse, but that's all you need. You know what I mean?
Thank you so much for that. That's a huge compliment. I really strove for that. And the fact that you recognize that is amazing to me. I'm very
Yeah,
appreciative.
no, I love it. So the photography, have you continued with photography now that you're in Tucson? I mean, do you have more photos coming that
All
would
my
be?
life. I mean, I post stuff on Instagram and Facebook like everybody else. I'm not going to be doing a specific photo book necessarily, but I've got an eye, and I really do like to take pictures. Of course, now everybody likes to take pictures, and everybody takes really great pictures. So, hey, there you go. I feel so sorry for all my friends that are professional photographers.
I know.
Really do, but I mean, what can I say? But the thing about Old West also is, these journeys we take through life, and how if you expect things to stay the same, then you're going to be deeply disappointed, because the only thing that's constant is change. And actually, I wrote a piece about that in the book, in my first book. I think I'd like to read it to you, if that's okay.
Okay.
It's called London Town. And I actually have to say that when I lived in London, it was, the first time was at really the height of punk rock. And then I went back, and that had kind of chilled out a little, and different sort of scenes were happening. But the original days of punk rock, and my experiences, all my British and Irish friends' experiences were very similar. So this poem is called London Town, and it's kind of a combination of like all of our experiences in a nutshell.
Okay. And just so you know, we have 225 left. So if you cut off, I will then send you another Zoom link, and we can just pick it up again.
That's fine. Or this might be a good place to end it, whatever you
Okay.
decide.
All
Okay.
right, no, that sounds good. And yeah, I mean, this is a really awesome poem. It might be a great way to wrap things up.
Whatever you want. I am all
Okay.
about London town. Boots and glory. London town. Old Union Jack and leather. A man can only count on change. Nout stays the same forever. Trite as shite as that might sound, that is how we hit the ground. Reckless punks in DM boots and trendy mods in skinny suits. Got pissed in after hours pubs when the filth were on the beat. They smashed us with their billy clubs, then London town was not so sweet. Black and white skanked arm in arm to reggae, ska, and dub's hot scene. Then skin turned into racist pigs committing violent acts obscene. Margaret Thatcher made life hell. Despair raged down an endless hole. Jobs were scarce. My friends were skint signing on to get their dole. The boys were tough. The girls were hard. Romance did not exist. We slammed to tunes while garage bands spat at us to resist. We broke squats on the Loughborough Road and lived from day to day. Brick Alley smelled of piss and chips and curry takeaway. We were not hippie boomers. We were Generation Jones. Speed and smack insomniacs who worship dust and bones. Not much more to talk about that hasn't yet been said. So many of us from this time are fucked, sober, or dead. At night, the two-tone sirens wail their ancient, vacant sound for all those Rastas, punks, and scooter mods who once ruled London town.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That is an awesome poem, and that's like the perfect way to end our interview. So for upcoming projects, you have the audiobook that you're working on. And tell us again your social media handles and how to follow and stay up to date on what you're doing.
Thanks. Instagram, Original Punkster 11, because apparently there were 10 before me. So there's that. I have a website, eddevans.com. I have a YouTube channel. And my publisher in the UK is Earth Island Books. My promoter and publisher here in the US is DiWulf Publishing and Silver Street Media. And I'm available on Amazon. I'm available on Barnes & Noble, both nationally and internationally. And we'll provide you with the links so you can put them in the comments.
Wonderful. So it's been so wonderful talking. I could talk to you all day, Edie. I really could.
Back at you.
This was Edie's first book, and then the new one, Old West. And definitely check them both out. They're both just wonderful. So again, it was great talking to you. And when the audiobook comes out, maybe we can catch up again.
I'd love to. Maybe I'll see you at the Punk Rock Museum sometime.
Yes, definitely. Next time I come to Vegas.
That would be great. Anyways, yeah, I'd look forward to catching up again at some point, Ames. Thanks so much for your time.
And as always, thank you for listening to the DiWulf Podcast. Thanks.
smoky burning light, adding up to nothing. You deal and then you die. Ooh, adding up to nothing. Ooh, adding up to nothing. Stolen cash, adding up to nothing. A cup of burning hash, rolling out like thunder. A smoky burning light, adding up to nothing. You deal after you die. Ooh, adding up to nothing. Adding up to nothing.